for joining us to discuss an important topic, that of national monument designations. Talk about how they impact private landowners, of which I am one, so thank you very much, Celeste. First, I'd like to thank Celeste Malloy of Utah. She's the vice chair. Representative Bentz of the great state of Oregon. And momentarily, we will also have Representative Miller Meeks of Iowa. She will be joining us. Also, I want to thank our panelists, Megan Jenkins of the Pacific Legal Foundation, Leland Pollock of Garfield County. Happy birthday, Leland.
Thank you.
Garfield County, Utah. We have Garfield County in Washington, too. And also State Representative Jennifer Jones from New Mexico's 32nd District. Thank you both, or I thank all three of you for making the trek here to Capitol Hill to highlight the issues and how they impact you. The purpose of this event is to hear from our stakeholders on how the Antiquities Act of 1906 has been leveraged to impede the rights of private landowners. National monuments are intended to preserve historic and prehistoric structures of land of cultural significance with the smallest parcel of land to achieve that goal. Now, we're not opposed to national monuments, don't get me wrong. Things such as Devil's Tower in in Wyoming, or Scotts Bluff in Nebraska. Those things are true to the original law's intent. Instead, what we have seen is a gross misuse of executive power to prevent land from achieving its resource potential and being essentially locked up for multiple use purposes. So I look forward to hearing from the members and the panelists on this subject who joined us today. I would ask members to keep remarks to about 5 minutes so that we can have a robust question and answer period once the panelists have given their opening remarks. So with that, I'd like to hand off to Vice Chair Malloy of Utah for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent the 2nd District in Utah, and if you follow national monument news at all, you know that Utah is at the forefront of these arguments about national monuments, and there are a couple of reasons. One, it's the most beautiful state in the union, and so there are places that people make arguments should be preserved, and then also national monuments can only be created from land that's federally managed, and Utah has the 2nd highest percentage of that of any state in the country, just after Nevada. So we have these dry western states that most of our land is managed by the federal government, and that's, we like the open space, we like the rural lifestyle, but it comes with burdens. It means the federal government's our landlord for most of our land. And then on top of that, you have a whole list of federal designations that make living there and making a living there much more complicated, and national monuments are one of them. We have several national monuments in Utah, and some of them are not at all controversial. I live in Cedar City, and right above Cedar City we have Cedar Breaks, and it's a beautiful geographic formation. It's not something that's going to be used for anything else, and it draws in tourists, and that's kind of the sweet spot of what a national monument should be. It's the right size, it's an escarpment, and it's beautiful. Then we also have the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. It was created in 1996 by President Clinton from Arizona. He knew it was going to be controversial, wouldn't even come to Utah to make the designation, stood on the north rim of the Grand Canyon and created a 1.9 million acre monument. It's way too big, and it does encompass some really beautiful places that probably should be preserved, but it also encompasses some places that don't really have any significance. They were managed by the Bureau of Land Management before it was a national monument. They were managed by the Bureau of Land Management after it was a monument. All it protected us from was one of the best full reserves in the world being developed. And so I've made the argument for a long time that Section 2 of the Antiquities Act is an anachronism. It doesn't make sense anymore. In 1906, we were still disposing of land, and it made sense for the executive branch to be able to move quickly to preserve something like Devil's Tower or Cedar Breaks and make sure it didn't get homesteaded inappropriately. But now we're not disposing of land since Flipma in 1976. The federal government is retaining land, and there's no reason for the executive branch to have to move quickly. The legislative branch should be making these decisions. And I think, we're in a very close after Chevron being repealed world where we're reestablishing the balance of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I think this is a really good time to be talking about monuments and what role the proclamation power should have. And I would argue that we just should get rid of it and repeal Section 2. And with that, I'm probably out of my 5 minutes, and we'll follow up with questions because I know Commissioner Pollack has lots to share about that. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Cliff Bentz of Oregon.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about an issue that is of extreme importance in my district, CD2 in Oregon. The county in which I live is about 9 million acres in size, and there has been a rumor for a long time that 2 million of those acres was going to be made into a national monument. So it's pretty close to home for me because I grew up on a cattle ranch or ranches, and a number of my younger brothers, 3 of them, still are involved in the ranching business. So we know exactly what a grazing permit is. We know what happens to that type of economic element branches when something like this happens. We know because we can look at the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument over on the western side, Oregon, southern part of my district, and see that ranchers are being removed from that. Their permits are not being renewed. So a monument is a way for the president to remove from the economic portfolio of Oregon millions of acres and hundreds of ranches. We have about 200 grazing permits in my county, and what would happen to them if that monument were to come into place? Nothing good. One of the other things we've been working on for about 8 years is a transition out of the wilderness study area space into a wilderness space with careful focus on what we can do inside those spaces. And we can control that outcome. That's not the case with a national monument. The president comes in, he or she writes down their purpose, and then everything must follow according to whatever the president decides he or she wants that purpose to be. That's not a democratic way of handling things. And it's not the best thing for the land. The best thing for the land is to keep the people who have been there for 450 years on it, stomping out the fires as best they can when they start, and trying to keep down the invasive species that are literally taking over our public lands, literally. And so if we're interested in protecting the land, the way we would do it is keep people out there. And so we're hoping that the bill that I have prepared and sitting on my desk to transition out of WSA land, at least some of it, and into wilderness with appropriate features will rule the day, so to speak. And we won't end up with a monument slapped down upon all of us by one man or one woman, as opposed to the literally hundreds of people who work so hard to try to manage and protect this land. So with that, yield back. And I just want to say I'm very happy for this opportunity to ask a knowledgeable panel really difficult questions. I'm looking forward to that. And so thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Malloy and Chair Newhouse, for allowing me to be here and to speak on my legislation, H.R. 5499, the Congressional Oversight of the Antiquities Act. And I'm very grateful it was considered in legislative hearing. I'm not a member of the Natural Resources Committee, but I am a member of the Congressional Western Caucus, recruited by Chair Newhouse when I put forth a little teeny resolution on WOTUS about 3 months to my foray into Congress. But certainly the Antiquities Act has been something I've been very interested in, and primarily that interest really was piqued during the Obama administration, when we saw acres upon acres upon acres, millions of acres being set aside. And when you think about our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, I know this is weird, but life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And one of the things that allows the pursuit of happiness, happiness is not an emotion in the Constitution. Happiness is the ability to own private property, the ability to take risks, to be entrepreneurial, i.e., through your actions, you can create happiness. And so one of the ways that we do that in the United States is in private property. And we know that managed land, even if that's land that's set aside, that it is better utilized, it is better maintained, and it's better for the country. So the Antiquities Act, and you all know this, it was established in 1906 to authorize the president to protect antiquities or monuments, and primarily this was Indian artifacts, and objects of historic interest under imminent threat. The plain language of the law requires that all designations be confined to the smallest area compatible with proper care and management of the objects to be protected. Does anyone in this room think that we have been, maintaining the statute, the law? We certainly haven't been restricting it to the smallest area compatible with proper care and management of objects. And we've seen that, and we recently saw that with President Biden's declaration around the Grand Canyon. And that's, again, 1 million acres. Presidents, both Republican and Democrat, have repeatedly flouted the rule of law and usurped the powers of Congress to arbitrarily block off millions of acres of land. That's why I became interested in this. President Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to use the act. He used it 18 times to reserve a combined total of 1.5 million acres. President Barack Obama used it 37 times to designate 553.6 million acres of land and water. In 2023, President Biden unilaterally restricted access to almost 1 million acres of land surrounding the Grand Canyon. Actions such as these are not the rule of law, and they are not in keeping with the law. To vest one man or woman with the unfettered power to make these decisions with no congressional check or local input should be offensive to every member of Congress who has taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the impartial rule of law. So H.R. 5499 is actually very simple. It requires congressional approval of presidential monument or reservation declarations within 6 months or before the end of the last session of Congress it was introduced, whichever comes first. If not approved by Congress, the monument cannot be designated again by the president for 25 years. Very simple. It doesn't prohibit a president from doing such action, but it requires congressional approval. And with that, I yield.
Well, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'll introduce all three of you, and then we'll have you go individually, and then we'll move to questions. So Megan Jenkins is the Strategic Research Director for Pacific Legal Foundation, a public interest law firm that represents individual Americans when their constitutional rights are violated. Megan has been studying the intersection between economics and environmental policy for over a decade. She holds a master's degree in economics from Utah State University, go Aggies. Her work has been featured in national outlets including C-SPAN, USA Today, and The Hill. Thanks for being here. Leland Pollock is the current chair of the Garfield Utah County Commission and former chair of the National Association of Counties Public Lands Committee. Sorry, Leland. He's testified before the House Natural Resources Committee on multiple occasions, including in support of the Trump administration's adjustments to the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. It's riveting testimony. If you haven't watched it, I recommend you go find it on YouTube. And Representative Jennifer Jones is the state representative for New Mexico's House District 32. She and her family have a long history of service to Luna County, and she's remained in tune with the unique needs of a rural community near the border. As a legislator, she's fought for land and water rights of our farmers and ranchers, and she stood against policies and regulations that would hurt our rural economy. Thank you all for being here. We'll start with you, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me. I want to start off by showing you a map that is likely familiar to the leaders of Western states in this room. It shows the percent of each state that is owned by the federal government. In my home state of Utah, that's about 60% of the land that is federally owned. In our next door neighbor, Nevada, it's nearly 80%. Public land, of course, is mandated by law to be used for public benefit, for productive activities like grazing, fishing, and energy development. But in recent decades, of course, a 117-year-old law has been used to remove millions of acres of federal land from productive use. The Antiquities Act, as has been described, was created with good intentions to protect artifacts and objects of scientific interest. This is a picture of Dinosaur National Monument. It's one of my favorite national monuments to visit, and it's in eastern Utah. Every year, my family likes to camp there on the banks of the Green River. Really beautiful place. I actually took this picture last September. But in the early 1900s, paleontologists were astonished to find such a large collection of dinosaur bones all in one place. They kept digging and digging until eventually they decided, we'll just leave the bones where they are and build a visitor center all around them. When they were first discovered, these fossils were at risk of looting and destruction. To protect them, President Woodrow Wilson established Dinosaur National Monument, setting aside 80 acres around the quarry site. The Antiquities Act requires the president to set aside the smallest area compatible with the protection of relevant objects. Many early monuments actually did comply with this requirement. We talked about Devil's Tower when President Theodore Roosevelt designated just over 1,000 acres in Wyoming as our first national monument. Some modern monuments follow this principle as well. In 2006, President George W. Bush set aside approximately 7 acres in New York City at the site of a historic African burial ground. But over time, the Antiquities Act has been abused. Instead of protecting discrete objects and the smallest area compatible with protecting them, it's being used to set aside entire ecosystems. This figure from my recent research report shows the number of acres designated each year since the 1970s. During that decade, President Carter set aside 56 million acres, nearly 6 times the acreage of all preceding presidents combined. Since then, of course, things have only gotten worse. 90% of all acres designated were set aside since the year 2000. Figure 3 shows just how large modern monuments have become. In many cases, they are as large or larger than U.S. states. Here you can see Bears Ears National Monument in my home state of Utah, nearly the size of Connecticut. Marine monuments are even larger. This next slide shows, in 2016, a monument that President Obama expanded to be nearly twice as big as the state of Texas. But what these maps don't show are the real people who are affected by national monument designations. At Pacific Legal Foundation, we are representing people like Chris Heaton, who's pictured here on his land on the Utah-Arizona border. The Heaton family has ranched this land for over 6 generations. When President Biden designated Ancestral Footprints National Monument, he jeopardized the Heaton family's future ability to use their land and graze cattle as they have for generations. The monument designation also comes with criminal penalties. That means if some of the Heaton's cattle, even on accident, damage an object on the monument, he may be subject to criminal penalties. In conclusion, it should take more than one person's signature to decide whether to withdraw millions of acres of public lands from productive use. Possible solutions include requiring congressional approval, especially for monuments over a certain size. These state-specific exemptions already exist for Alaska and for Wyoming. The rest of the U.S. states deserve equal treatment. Congress could also require that activities under the Antiquities Act be subject to notice and comment period under the Administrative Procedure Act. These types of reforms would give certainty to people like Chris Heaton, that they will be able to pursue their livelihoods and feed their families. Because managing our public lands is not just about land, it's about people. Thank you very much.
Well, I've become a veteran Congresswoman Malloy on the Grand Staircase, but I'm going to hit on a lot of things, and you can ask me questions. I was born inside the Grand Staircase boundaries. I was actually born in Pine Ridge, but I grew up in Tropic, simply because there's a hospital in Pine Ridge. There isn't one in that remote area. but it was a town of about 150 people. Rice Valley area, the little free town, Rice Valley, you had about 75 people in Henryville, and 100, give or take, in Canada. So I'm like you, Congresswoman. I come from small areas. And I grew up inside the boundaries. I didn't move to Vanquish until I was about 18, 19 years old. That was my home. Now, for me as a kid to grow up in that area and see what's happened to that area is completely, it's not excusable. What Chris Heaton's gonna deal with is gonna be bad. I hate to say that. But I'll go back to the Antiquities Act. In 1906, it was a good thing, you know. That's how you got Yellowstone, Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon National Park, by the way, 33,000 acres. 33,000 acres. Grand Staircase, 1.9, 2 million. Okay? By the way, nobody wants to go and see 80% of it. It just doesn't happen. I mean, to say it's tourism, that's a joke. That's propaganda. And that's another good opportunity for us and me as a veteran of that area and as a commissioner dealing with this for 4 terms as a county commissioner to come back and tell the truth. You know, it's easy to tell the truth, and I'm going to tell the truth today. And I'm glad that it's being recorded because I've got quite a fan base in Utah, and they, you know, I won't go any further because I've already been on the front page of the Tribune over what I've said. But anyway, I'm going to tell you all the truth. What they can do to us, we can do to them. And we did it with Trump. And I don't care how bad they hate Trump. He's basically my hero because I was one of the commissioners that said, please do this, President. And he did it. And by the way, 2 million acres, if Connecticut's 1.3, this is 2 million acres in 2 counties. Grazing was mentioned by the representative from Oregon. Yeah, half the cattle that was being grazed in 1996 are gone. Are gone 50%. And in that span, there's actually 200 allotments. So half of those ranchers have been bankrupted, half of them. So Chris could be on that chopping block as well. Now, and no matter what the other side spends, like no AUMs have been removed, that's a total lie. They've been suspended. That means you don't graze. So literally, now another thing, I'm going to go back to the tourism value. When I was sworn in, I thought, well, you know, my county's been bankrupted by this albatross. I'm going to get with my tourism director and I'm going to see if we can promote tourism. This actually happened. Fallon Owens is her name. And I got with her and I got with the management of the Grand Staircase. The assistant monument manager is the one that was offended. And I said, and I'll tell you why she was offended later, but I said, okay, let's get together, let's promote this thing, and nobody's going and seeing it. It's a disaster for tourism. Let's make it work, and Garfield County can promote it. And she was literally offended. You know what she told me? It was not created for tourism, Commissioner. It was created for the study of science. Fact, okay? And I said, so you don't even want to promote that thing for tourism, like Bryce Canyon? Or, oh no, that's against the original intent of the proclamation. And I went back and read it. Yeah. It's not. I mean, they might say that this has been a boon for tourism. I'll give you a good example. Little Escalante School, 7th through 12th grade. In 1996, you might not think 150 children is a lot, but it is to us rural schools. 7th through 12th grade, about 150. You know what that enrollment went to in 2016 when we declared a state of emergency at the request of the school district? 54 students. Now, how do you educate 7th through 12th grade? How do you educate that many students? You don't. And so basically a bankrupted, that just tells you if there's no jobs, who can raise a family? Who can raise a family on minimum wage in this room? Nobody. Nobody. So The story that this has been some great thing is absolutely false. And I'm going to say this. I'm extremely offended by these environmental groups, so-called environmental special interest groups, that say they're the true environmentalists. If they're the true environmentalists, how come they destroy everything they try to protect? They burn massive amount of forests because they shut down the sawmills. They've ruined millions of acres of western grazing, public land that wildlife uses. They've ruined it. They've destroyed it. And guess who is trying to restore and recover the land? People like me and our congresswoman from Utah. So who is the true environmentalist? Who wants to make the land healthy? Not only do we want to make it healthy, we're doing it where we can, and they sue us to stop us from making the land healthy. True story. They literally litigate. Now, the reason they're using this Antiquities Act in such a fashion is they don't have to litigate. All they got to do is get one man that, in the last case, Biden, I'm not so sure he even had any idea what he was signing, really literally, because he has no idea about where it was, the history of it, nothing. So this should scare the hell out of anybody on either side of the aisle, whether you're a Democrat commissioner in a rural county or a Republican or to the congressional level. This should scare the hell out of everybody, because if one side can do it, the other side can't. Now, Trump, he didn't weaponize it, he just tried to put things back into order. You know, what he did, we made it better, and we could prove that. So I could go on for a long time, but looks like we're here for you all. So I encourage any questions, because what I've lived through, it happened. And it could happen to everybody else with one man's signature. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to share our story about what's happening in Southwest New Mexico. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I appreciate the data you shared and your stories, and it confirms my vision and my fears for my district, for my county, Boone County. I brought some pictures because it's difficult to condense what's happened in the last 8 months into 5 minutes, so I thought this might help me out a little bit. There was a press event and a media launch back in December where proponents have been actively pushing the monument status with a website, national publications, and on social media. They inaccurately claim to have widespread local support. These are some examples of their social media presence. They have recently entered the community to hire youth to collect signatures from residents who are unknowledgeable about national monuments, but are in favor of protecting the mountains. That's how they get the signatures. They claim that we need to protect the mountains. These are some of an example of some of the monument supporters. Nearly all of these are outsiders. The Friends of the Floridas is a small group of mainly retirees who've moved into the area with their own money. They really don't, for the most part, they don't need to be concerned about the economic status of our county. These proponents are actively supporting the monument proposal on social media, claiming widespread support, which couldn't be further from the truth. This was part of their media launch. It was a media launch that took place all over the nation, and this is prior to any of the stakeholders or elected officials, local or elected or state elected officials, even being aware that this was happening. The monument is being promoted as an outdoor recreation project and an economic opportunity for a county that's struggling and struggles with chronic poverty. The centerpiece of their website is a petition asking the president to use his authority under the Antiquities Act to sign the monument into law by the end of this year. My question is, does 245,000 acres of Boone County meet the criteria status for the Antiquities Act? I think you all have answered that. No, absolutely it does not. There is no isolated area that's been focused on. It's simply 245,000 acres of our mountains. And they say it's to shape the future of our public lands. So what are the opponents to this monument doing? The Luna County Farm and Livestock Bureau has been amazing. They've put together a digital media campaign because of the outpouring of opposition against this monument. They have a website of their own. They're just doing a great job of gathering information, educating the public, and I'm not the best at PowerPoints, but here we go. Okay, here's another example of some of their work online. Their centerpiece of their website is also petitions, because we have tried to get petitions, people signing the outpouring of opposition, and up to 2,500 people have signed our petitions. So another thing that's happened is following many public meetings, because we've had several of them, opposition to that national monument has grown. Understanding its history and implications, all elected bodies in Luna County, along with several organizations and businesses, have passed resolutions against it. This designation does not suit Luna County. So far, the county commissioners of 7 other New Mexico counties have joined with the anti-monument resolutions. So the monument status doesn't prioritize local decision-making, which will undermine the foundation of our economy and the potential for future growth, which is desperately needed. Any new monument restriction, which limits access and operations for ranching and responsible mining, will have a negative impact on the county's struggling economy. Some likely outcomes of monument status are loss of public access, restricted entry and potential access fees, impact on ranching, limited operations due to new regulations. Tourism effects would be no more rock hounding at Rockhound State Park. It's, I know the only park in the state that attracts people so they can come and they can actually mine, as tourists, they can mine semi-precious stones and take them away. I don't think that's something that would happen in a monument. It hasn't been. Mining viability, small mines may become unsustainable, and the economic impact, a threat to BLM-approved magnesium mine project in Luna County, which is a real possibility for prosperity rather than poverty in our county. The desert ecosystem would potentially be harmed, like you said, Leland. Oftentimes these efforts at environmental control are harmful rather than helpful. There are no natural water sources in the desert. There are no natural water sources in Luna County, and the ranchers are the people who actually drill the wells and sustain the stock tanks that provide water for birds, wildlife, and their cattle. So the people of New Mexico, people of Luna County, think that this is a done deal. We've talked about it, we've met, we've learned what we needed to learn. We know this won't work. It'll be economically devastating. It will prevent us from moving forward in a way, like I just mentioned, with a mining possibility. I'll actually describe that to you. We have 2 small foothills that are loaded with magnesium. They're not underground, they're sitting in a deposit, and they're not within the mountains themselves. They're small foothills within a 40-acre area, and after years of working with the BLM, there's been a no significant impact study to move forward with this magnesium mine. Magnesium is on the critical mineral list of the United States. We need that. We don't want to depend on outside sources for magnesium. So this is really important, not only to the U.S., but to the people of New Mexico, to the people of Luna County. It would provide some jobs that are much needed in the area. And so that would be moving forward, but to hinder ranching, which is the backbone of our community. It has been for generations. Like I think it was you just mentioned, we have ranching families who have stewarded the land for 100 years or more. Generation after generation, they are committed to our community. They're committed to caring for the land, and they do it well. And it wouldn't take a whole lot of pushback and restrictions to make their job even more difficult and have them just say, this is too much, and sell out and go do something a little easier. But they have remained committed, and they're very much a part of our history, our past history, and our community moving forward. They would be, the impact of a monument would be devastating for them. And I mentioned the desert ecosystem as well. The potential harm due to the lack of natural water resources or the natural water sources would be harmful. The ranchers currently supply that water. So the people think this is a done deal, and it's not. The president of the Farm and Livestock Bureau in Lincoln County, Russell Johnson, who's also a rancher, and his family's been ranching for a long time in Lincoln County, over 100 years. Rancher Scott Chandler, Commissioner Colette Chandler and I came 2 weeks ago. We came to speak with our congressional delegation. We were voicing the concerns of our constituents, and we hand-delivered those resolutions and the many letters and resolutions from other businesses and other entities that are against the monument. Hand-delivered those, and we discussed with the Department of Interior, the will of the people, the Department of Agriculture, and we continue to welcome that conversation. I can't say we were I think there was a neutral outcome on that, but I can go back to my district and say that they know. There's no doubt about it, they know. So here we are, looking for Ubers and restaurants. That prior picture was us with Senator Hyman's staff. So thank you for the time and attention. I appreciate the opportunity to open for questions, and I have my contact info there. If anybody didn't get a Zia pin, I have them, and I had the handout. I hope everybody got one of those. It has the basics of the monument proposal. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you for being here and for testifying. We're going to ask a few questions. This is a friendly crowd. You don't have to be nervous about the questions we're going to ask. But there are a few things I want to tease out from what you've testified about. I'm going to start with you, Commissioner Pollock. So you talked about how one person can sign a proclamation and create a national monument. And that's a lot of the problem I think we all have with national monuments, is that it's a way of scoring cheap political points without a lot of political process or input. And the outcome matters, but so does the process. And I just want to point out that with the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, in particular, presidential proclamation, nobody was happy about it at the time. The Utah delegation was united in opposition to it. Local officials were united in opposition to it. That's why President Clinton didn't come to Utah to make the proclamation. But the proclamation itself actually has softening language in it, and I've got it right here. I want to read it because I think this helps prove the point. So it says, nothing in this proclamation shall be deemed to affect existing permits or leases for or levels of livestock grazing on federal lands within the monument. Existing grazing uses shall continue to be governed by applicable laws and regulations other than this proclamation. And then that's been almost 30 years, and you've been in the area the whole time. What's your experience been with grazing on the monument?
Well, that's a good question, and I kind of hit on it a little bit. I'm glad you want me to follow up. When I said that there is 200 allotments, a lot of those allotments are so massive. There's 4 permittees on as many as 4. Some have 8. So the number of ranchers, you take down 50% of the calf crop on those allotments from those ranchers, you bankrupted them. That's a fact. There's 50% as many as there was. And what's sad about that is land has suffered. The land has suffered. We haven't been able to do range improvement.
So even though the presidential proclamation said it wasn't going to impact those rights, the president declares the monument, he moves on. and then it starts being managed by bureaucrats,
Yes,
and they have their manuals.
yes.
And you and I have a long history with the bureaucrats who run this monument. They'll say things like, well, it's just not in keeping with the nature of a monument.
Yes.
And so the management just keeps getting more and more restrictive in one direction all the time, regardless of what the presidential proclamation said. And so as offensive as it is that one person can create the monument, then it goes into the hands of bureaucrats who have no accountability whatsoever, and they just keep managing us and managing us and managing us right out of business. And then one of the other valid existing rights that was out there were a lot of roads. There's a lot of access out there. That what's your experience as a county been with maintaining roads and maintaining access since it became a monument almost 30 years ago?
Horrendous. You have to realize that a lot of the roads have been closed through time. We've tried to litigate, but still monuments are a little bit different to litigate than BLM lands. So your access, you can only see, and by the way, there's not much pavement in that 2 million acres. It's all dirt roads. They won't let us maintain them. The road to the hole in the rock, the historic hole in the rock, is a disaster. All we want to do is chip seal it and make it like the bird trail so it's passable. Now it's hardly even passable. And the road situation and the access, you probably want to see some of that area. You might be interested. Try to get there. You can't walk. I mean, well, some people, no, even the healthiest, okay? We go out and rescue them from that think they can backpack. We literally saved their lives, the backpackers. That's a true story. The county does that, not the BLM. By the way, BLM is managing it. They don't know how to manage a monument. So bureaucrats, you're exactly, and I'll end on one thing. When you talk about bureaucrats, Bryce Canyon was created for the right reasons. It's managed quite well. You can see it. You go out there as tourists. There's 2.5 million people that go see it. You can actually see it. Not so on the Grand Staircase. You can't get around. Congresswoman, that's a great question. Your access has been taken away by this act. So literally you can't go see it either. Now you might get on a horse. Don't get one that bucks. I think got the scars and x-rays to prove that. So yeah, I hope I didn't go on too long, but yeah.
No, that was great, and I have one last follow-up question on it. So you alluded to it, but President Trump came and changed the size of that monument. He listened to the people of Utah who said it was too big. It became made smaller. President Biden made it bigger again, and so now they're writing new monument management plans. How do those management plans compare to the old ones? Are they more or less restrictive?
Oh yeah, they're 100%. We're gonna, because of the management plan alone, not even by the proclamation itself that Biden did to create the mess again. They're gonna come in and close more roads. They're gonna take away target shooting. I mean, in where I grew up, I could walk outside Tropic and shoot a .22 rifle. The kids that grow up in Tropic won't be able to do that now. How ridiculous is that? To shut down target shooting on 2 million acres? Things like that in the new management plan run by bureaucrats, as she has stated, is going to happen if we don't get a change in the White House, because this is going to go on and on and on. Now, even the plan itself gets more insane through years. The original, after the Clinton proclamation, that management plan was made worse by agency approval. So the agencies come in and created stupid things like you can only have 12 heartbeats in one area. So what does that mean? If you're on a horse, that's a heartbeat, you know? And so ridiculous things like that, they created after the plan, after the fact.
Yeah.
So it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, thank you. I've used more than my share of the time, so I'm going to move quickly, but Representative Jones, I think that's one of the things I hope people in New Mexico are seeing is that a lot of the marketing around national monuments is really dishonest. Even when those boundaries changed, you know, there was a full page ad in the New York Times when President Trump made the monument smaller, said the president just stole your land. Big full page ad in the New York Times, still being managed by the Bureau of Land Management. But it's easy to sell this as, you know, monuments are a good thing, they're preserving our lifestyle, they're preserving our land, when they're doing the opposite. And maybe just quickly, I love that picture with Chris Heaton. I also know him, he's got deep roots in that area, his family has deep roots in that area, they've been good stewards of the land. Can you just talk really quickly about what it is you're doing to help them try to maintain their heritage and their access?
Of course, yes. So Pacific Legal Foundation is a nonprofit law firm, and we help individuals when their rights are violated by the federal government. And unfortunately, that's happening quite frequently to people like Chris Heaton. So in his case, Chris Heaton manages this ranch. He owns water rights that give him permission to graze on federal land. He also owns some of his land outright, of course. We are helping him to push back on that monument designation and show that he is being harmed, that it is irreparable harm, and that really there's an issue with separation of powers. Of course, our Constitution creates these checks and balances on the different branches of government, and these are some of the most important safeguards of individual liberty. When laws like the Antiquities Act are used by one person to take such large action, that creates a severe threat to the separation of powers. So we are fighting in the courts for his rights, looking at arguments around the separation of powers.
Thank you, Representative Malloy, Vice Chair. Interesting topic, so thank you all for your testimony today, you're offering your ideas. I totally agree that the system lacks the checks and balances that should be in place to protect property rights, private property rights, also to make sure that things comply with the intent of the law. I guess my question, maybe I've just watched too much TV or movies or something, but it seems to me that over time, many of these set-asides, these monuments are created toward the end of a president's term. We're coming up on the end of a president's term. Besides the situation in New Mexico, Luna County, which sounds to me like is right, I was just curious if there are things that we should be aware of happening in the West that are potential monument designations anytime in the next 6 months or so.
You're targeted, but I'll just say, follow up with that. By the way, the Grand Staircase, and in 1996, the Anilex coal mine was opening. Congresswoman Boyd spoke of the coal. It's a plateau, you can read it. It's not propaganda, it's the largest, most valuable on the planet, okay? We had a coal mine opening up after years and years and years, okay? The Anilex coal mine. It was created to stop coal mining, just like the Arizona Strip to stop uranium mining. And, you know, it was weaponized for that. But the bullseye, it's me today. It's probably here tomorrow, but it's coming everywhere. Oregon, anywhere there's Western federal public lands, with this guy, I mean, this could be the Armageddon of monuments by November. Well, after November, it would be just in that period. Because all they got to do, they don't do any research. They just go out and do boundaries and make their proclamation. It's as simple as that. There's no process like, you know, going through local elected officials, nothing. They just create monuments. So that's a great question, and I'm telling everybody, I'm glad you're here today, because it's coming to every western state with federal public lands. I promise you. And maybe not this time, you might dodge the bullet, literally, but you will be targeted.
Yeah, I don't know if I said this already, but your story has been my vision of what will happen in the future. And there's a desperate feeling about how can we stop this? And so, you know, that would be my question to you all. And you mentioned some legislation that you have in the works. Is it possible that any of that could delay a monument designation?
if we could pass legislation that changes the proclamation power, that doesn't just delay it, that actually does change the ability of a president to pass it. Also, I think in a post-Chevron world, there's a chance if people like Civic Legal are taking the right cases to the Supreme Court, that we could get a favorable ruling from the court that limits the power of a president to create a monument. Now something outside's clapping for that, so it's great.
Well, thank you very much, our panelists, for coming to Washington, D.C. and sharing your thoughts on something that I know has gotten a lot of attention over the last several years, and get a lot more. There were some good ideas that emerged from this. I really like the idea that came out that anything above a certain size could use, perhaps would be better served if we had congressional approval. I'm not hearing anybody saying take away the Antiquities Act altogether, but it certainly should have some thoughtful restrictions or limitations. Get the public involved in the process. That's key to anything we do around here, be transparent, and I think kind of the Antiquities Act should be no exception. So I want to thank Vice Chair Malloy for raising this important issue. As chairman of the Congressional Western Caucus, this is what we want to focus on, those things that are important to people in the western part of the United States, in rural United States of America. So and thank the panelists for your participation today, very valuable. I want to thank everybody here for being part of this presentation. I hope you have a lot of good questions and come away with maybe some conclusions that will help us make some positive, constructive changes to the Antiquities Act. Thank you very much.